hear that? Holy crap. I'm pretty sure that's a Bigfoot. Let me tell you a story. Welcome to Season 2. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of Reverend Jeff's Bigfoot Campfire Stories. From time to time, a story comes in that really shakes a person to their core. When I first got the details on this one, I was truly shaken, just a bit. 3 friends, Terry, Pete, and Trevor, went on a snowshoe camping adventure in the desolate wilderness and end up in a situation that only the strongest of wills might survive. Let's listen to their story. When Pete first suggested that Trevor and I follow him into the Desolation Wilderness, I thought he was already mad. It was February and cold. But when he added our destination would be Dick Peak, well, and it involved snowshoes and camping in, 12-degree weather, I was sure he was insane. But here I was, picking both him and Trevor up. We're going to head towards Lake Tahoe to get this trip going. Pete was very experienced in snowshoe hiking, and he was a cold weather survival guide for several years, so I knew we would be safe enough, but wow, was this a scary situation. Well, Pete's 4x4 is pretty gnarly, and he's able to get us way up through Dick's Pass and on into Dick Lake. Well, that was about as far as he felt safe, so it was only 15 miles to Dick Peak, and we should be able to reach that on day 2. Trevor was always down for anything, and he was a big surfer back in the day, and he kept in fantastic shape, so the 3 of us should be able to pull this off without too much worry. But we set off from the truck about 10 o'clock that morning. I was surprised with the gear on our backs that we were able to stay on top of the snow, but sure enough, even in some very deep places, we just skirted along the top like it was nothing. If you couldn't tell, this was definitely my first snowshoe adventure, and I was a bit nervous about it all. We were able to make it a couple of miles in before we needed to take a break. Dick Lake was much bigger than any of us had thought, and there was a tree line around it that was just teeming with wildlife. We saw deer, a couple of coyotes, and all kind of flying raptors about, but the sun was moving on, and, well, so should we. Well, we finally made it around the end of Dick Lake, and night was coming in fast, so we found a safe place to set up camp and put up our tent for the night. We had split up the weight of a 3-man tent between us, so our body heat could keep us through the night. Brutal 12 degrees, it's all been all day. The night is going to get far colder. Well, Pete had wandered off to find some safe bathroom location, and when he returned, he told us of some very strange tracks leading back down towards the lake. He said they looked like a man's tracks, but much bigger. Ben asked what could have made them. Well, Trevor and I set off with him to take a look, and sure enough, there in the snow, there were many, not just a few tracks leading in and out towards the lake. 1.5 times the size of mine and super wide, and I wore a size 12. Well, the sun was really falling off now, and it wouldn't be long before dark to see anything, so we headed back to camp, agreeing that we'd take a look at it more in the morning. But we managed to gather up a bunch of good dry wood on the way back to camp, so we set up a nice fire outside the tent so we could reflect it back on the heat of the rocks where the tent was set up. And sure enough, we had a nice warm pad to sleep on all night long. Well, it wasn't until about 4 o'clock in the morning and the fire had died down very low that we were awoken by something near camp. Well, I thought I had heard something, but all of a sudden, just then, there was a second call out. It sounded like a very deep monkey whoop, but there aren't any monkeys in California, let alone this high in the mountains. Now the 3 of us were awake and frantically getting warmer clothes on to go investigate. And we piled outside of the tent and strapped on the snowshoes and went for a look around. Trevor yelled out to us first that he had found a set of tracks, and we headed over to him, and sure enough, they were the same type of tracks, but far smaller than the ones we saw the day before. Well, Pete was a bit ahead of us and following the tracks back into the tree line, and then it happened again. Whoop, whoop, whoop! and the three of us froze in place and turned towards the sound. Well, all of us spotted it at about the same time. It looked like a small, hairy child. Reddish brown in color, about 5 foot tall, and it swayed back forehead with big brow ridges, and it was swaying back and forth between two trees. We were all kind of shocked. Trevor spoke first and asked if I see it, to which, of course, I said, "Yes, I see the little hairy monkey kid," and he almost spit with a chuckle. That was when we all figured out it had to have been a young Bigfoot, and then it took off in the other direction. Pete, being the adventurer, of course, started off after this thing with his cell phone in his hand, trying to get a picture, and we took off after him, yelling for him to stop. Finally, about 200 yards into the tree line, Pete did stop, only it was too late, and he slipped under a big pine tree and disappeared. We could hear him calling out faintly, so we made our way slowly toward where he disappeared, and sure enough, he had slipped beneath the branches of a large snowdrift pine tree. The more he tried to climb out, the more the snow piled in on top of him. Finally, they sent me back to camp to get some rope gear, while Trevor kept an eye on Pete. And it took me a bit of time to get back to camp and back, as every pine I passed I was terrified I too would slip below them, or a Bigfoot would jump out behind and get me. Well, finally I got back, and Trevor was close enough to Pete to see him, and the ground was stable as could be. We tossed a rope down to Pete, and then ran the other around an exposed tree uphill and started to drag him out. Pete tossed out his snowshoes first, and then he began to pull up, as what surely would have been his death had he been there by himself. Well, just as Pete got onto solid ground and began to strap his snowshoes back on, we heard another one of those whoops. But this time it was a bit more distant and much, much deeper. It gave us all the chills to the bone. And believe it or not, the morning just got away from us. By the time I got back to camp, it was really too late to pack up and move, even if just to go back to the truck on the other side of the lake, as the sun would surely fall on us before we reached it. So we decided just to build a big fire and make a bunch of noise and hope he keeps the boogeyman away all night. Well, nothing much happened. Well, not until long after the sun went down. Pete and Trevor had piled the wood around the fire pit to help it dry out a bit, and it formed a big blind to one side of the camp, plopping out the wind, so it was kind of nice getting warmer by the hour as the rocks really heated up. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a low, soft whoop. We couldn't see anything, even though we lit the trees up with flashlights and all. Every time we thought we knew where the sound had come from, it would come from a different location. Well, just then, as Pete got up to put more wood on the fire, he froze in place, staring towards a tree. I got up and slowly walked over to him, and as I grabbed his arm, he whispered, "Do you see them? Do you see the red glowing eyes?" The red glowing eyes. Well, just then my eyes cleared from looking at the fire, and indeed I could see them. Several sets of red glowing eyes coming from the tree line, a couple of them moving from location to location. We quickly waved Trevor over to our location, but it was too late. It seemed like the glowing red eyes got brighter, and the most horrific roar you ever heard came from that direction, making all of us freeze in our boots and tremble with fear. That was when things got just a bit more crazy. Rocks the size of baseballs started raining in very close to where we were standing. Loud tree knocks slammed from the locations of the creatures as they were tearing down trees, and finally something tore towards us in camp. All I can remember are those red glowing eyes getting bigger and bigger as they got closer to us. And we backed up into camp, not knowing what else to do. As the creature passed the woodpile, he destroyed it as if it exploded, and branches flipped directly through the tent, just leveling it to the ground. Well, that was when Pete screamed out, "Head back to the truck," and we all made a break for it. We had all been smart enough to grab our snowshoes as we fled the camp, and only stopped long enough to watch each other's backs as we strapped them on, and off we were again. It had taken us nearly 5 hours to get around the lake, and when we arrived, but God only knows how long it would take now. I looked at my watch and saw that it was still hours before daybreak, and we still had a couple of miles to get back to the truck. From behind us, every once in a while, we would hear a faint whoop, as if they were following us, making sure that we left. Finally, several hours after daybreak, we could see the truck. It still took 20 minutes to get to where the truck was actually parked, and sure enough, there were trails of tracks, just like the first ones we had found, leading back and forth to the woods, as if something had been checking on the truck several times through the night. Well, we took no time to investigate, as we knew where that ended up, and Pete was turning the truck around. Before we knew it, we were already on our way out. It took us several hours to get back home, and along the way, we told a few people what had happened to us, and every one of us gave us the same look and nearly said the exact same thing. That's a great story, fellas. But no one was willing to go back and look at the location. If you had asked me before this trip what I thought of Bigfoot, I would have laughed and moved on. Now, I'm positive they're out there. These three guys sure got more adventure than they were looking for when the red-eyed giants showed up. Native stories tell us to be wary of the red eyes, as they are usually not very happy. After this story, I can see why. Thanks for watching. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you.